No one ever knocked on the janitor's closet, not unless they had a reason. He stayed completely still, barely breathing, listening. Another knock, more insistent this time. His mind raced through options. If he answered too quickly, it might seem suspicious. If he ignored it, whoever was on the other side might come back later, or worse, report him to someone higher up. Taking a slow breath, he adjusted his expression into something neutral, then cracked the door open just enough to see who was standing there. It was a woman, mid-30s, dark hair pulled into a tight ponytail. She wore a company ID badge clipped to her blazer, but Carter didn't recognize her. That wasn't surprising. He had been trained not to make eye contact with employees unless absolutely necessary. "Hey," she said, her voice casual, but her eyes sharp. "You got a second?" Carter forced a polite nod. "Yeah, what's up?" She glanced over her shoulder, as if making sure no one else was around, then leaned in slightly. "You should be careful where you stand at night," she said. "Sometimes people notice things they shouldn't." Then, without another word, she turned and walked away, leaving Carter standing there, his mind spinning. Who was she? A warning? A threat? Or something worse? Carter watched the woman disappear down the hall, his mind racing. That wasn't a casual warning. That was deliberate. A message. But from whom? Was she trying to help him, or was she letting him know that she knew exactly who he was? He waited a moment before stepping out of the closet, keeping his head down as he pushed his cart toward the next section of the building. The weight of the recorder in his pocket suddenly felt heavier. He needed to be careful, more careful than ever. As he rounded the next corner, he caught a glimpse of a security guard standing near the elevators. Carter had seen him before, but something about the way he was positioned now made him uneasy. He wasn't just standing there. He was watching. His radio was in his hand, but he wasn't speaking into it. Carter didn't stop. He kept moving like nothing was wrong, wheeling his cart past the guard, barely glancing up. He knew better than to act nervous. The moment someone suspected fear, they started asking questions, and he couldn't afford that. By the time he reached the maintenance area, his pulse had steadied, but his thoughts hadn't. He needed to get this recording to the bureau. If the people in that office were planning something big, they were running out of time. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, quickly typing out a message. **** got something. Possible exposure. Need extraction soon. ***. He hesitated before hitting send. Every instinct told him to wait, but waiting might get him killed. He pressed the button. The message sent. Now he had to act like nothing had changed. But something had. The woman's warning wasn't the only thing bothering him. It was the way she had looked at him, like she expected him to understand something, like she wanted him to figure something out. But what? Carter went back to his routine, moving through the building like he always did, but his senses were sharper now. He noticed small things he hadn't before: a door left slightly open on the executive floor, a group of men in suits talking in hushed voices near the loading dock, the same black SUV parked outside every night at the same time. Someone was moving pieces behind the scenes, and Carter was right in the middle of it. Hours passed, and just when he thought the night was settling down, something unexpected happened. The woman returned. This time she wasn't alone. She walked straight toward him, flanked by two men. Carter didn't know them, but their sharp eyes and stiff postures told him everything he needed to know. They weren't regular employees. "Come with us," she said. It wasn't a request. Carter's mind worked fast. He had two options: play along and see where this led, or run and blow his cover completely. Neither option was safe, but he had no choice. Without a word, he let go of his cart and followed them into the unknown. Carter walked in silence, his pulse steady, but his mind racing. The hallway stretched ahead, empty and quiet except for the soft echo of their footsteps. The woman led the way, her posture unreadable, while the two men flanked him like guards escorting a prisoner. They weren't being forceful, but Carter knew better. This wasn't a casual conversation. They were taking him somewhere for a reason. He glanced around, mapping every exit, every possible escape route. The building's layout was burned into his memory from weeks of cleaning every corner. But now he wasn't just a janitor. He was a target. The next morning, Maya walked into school with a different kind of energy. The fear, the frustration, it was all still there, but now it was mixed with something sharper. Determination. This wasn't just about her anymore. If Mr. Reynolds had been getting away with this for years, then how many other students had suffered in silence? And how many people had looked the other way? She spotted Aaliyah by their lockers and pulled her aside. "It's bigger than we thought," she whispered. "My dad found out there have been other complaints against Reynolds, but they disappeared." Aaliyah's eyes widened. "Wait, disappeared? How?" Maya exhaled. "Someone's been covering for him, and I think I know who." They exchanged a glance, and without another word, they headed straight to the principal's office. Maya had thought about going to the school board first, but she needed to see Principal Harris' reaction face to face. When they walked in, the secretary gave them a skeptical look. "Do you have an appointment?" Maya stood tall. "No, but it's important. It's about Mr. Reynolds." At the mention of his name, the secretary hesitated, then picked up the phone. A moment later, they were led inside. Principal Harris sat behind his desk, adjusting his glasses as they entered. "Miss Carter," he said, his tone polite but guarded. "What can I do for you?" Maya didn't waste time. "I have proof that Mr. Reynolds has been targeting students, not just me, others too. And I know complaints have been made against him before, but somehow they were never investigated." The principal's expression barely changed, but something in his eyes flickered. "That's a serious accusation." "I know," Maya said, holding his gaze. "And I also know someone's been protecting him." For a moment, there was silence. Then, Principal Harris leaned forward, folding his hands. "You need to be careful what you're suggesting, Maya." A chill ran down her spine. That wasn't the response of someone shocked by what she was saying. It was the response of someone who already knew. Aaliyah stiffened beside her. "So, it's true," she said quietly. The principal sighed, rubbing his temples. "Listen, you don't understand how these things work. Reynolds has connections. He's been here for years. You think you've been just taken down overnight." Maya's stomach twisted. "So, you have been covering for him." "I didn't say that," Principal Harris said quickly, but his voice wavered. Maya reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. "I recorded this conversation, and I'll be sharing it." The principal's face went pale. Before he could speak, there was a knock at the door. It swung open, and Captain Carter stepped inside, his badge clipped to his belt. His expression was unreadable, but Maya knew that look. He had already put the pieces together. Principal Harris swallowed hard. "Captain Carter, You don't have to explain," her father interrupted. "Not to me, but you what be explaining to the school board." Maya watched as the principal's shoulders slumped. He knew there was no way out of this. And as for Mr. Reynolds? By the end of the day, his name was removed from the school directory. But just when Maya thought it was over, another email landed in her inbox that night. **subject. You might have won this round, but be careful. Some people don't forget." Maya's breath hitched. This wasn't over. Not yet. Maya stared at the email, her hands tightening around her phone. Even after everything, after exposing Reynolds, after confronting Principal Harris, someone was still trying to intimidate her. She knew she should be scared, but instead she felt something else. Exhaustion, frustration, but most of all, resolve. She took a deep breath and walked into the living room, where her father sat reviewing paperwork from the case. Without a word, she handed him the phone. He read the message, his jaw tightening. "They're still trying to scare you," he said quietly. The school hallways were supposed to be a safe space for learning, but for 16-year-old Maya Carter, They felt like a battlefield. Every day, she walked into Jefferson High with her head held high, trying to ignore the whispers, the side eyes, and worst of all, the constant humiliation from her history teacher, Mr. Reynolds. It wasn't just the occasional harsh comment or strict grading. No, this was different. It was targeted, personal. Mr. Reynolds had a habit of singling Maya out in front of the class. He'd call on her when he knew she didn't have the answer, mock her in a way that made the other students laugh, and dismiss her thoughts as if they didn't matter. She tried to brush it off at first, thinking maybe she was imagining it. But as the weeks went by, it became painfully obvious. This wasn't just about being a tough teacher. There was something more to it. One afternoon, Maya sat in the middle of the classroom, taking notes as Mr. Reynolds lectured about American history. Then, out of nowhere, he turned to her. "Maya, why didn't you tell the class why some people struggle to succeed? Surely you must have some personal insight," he said, his tone dripping with something unspoken. A few students chuckled under their breath. Maya felt her face grow hot. She had heard comments like this before, statements disguised as questions, meant to put her in a box. She clenched her pen, took a deep breath, and answered with as much composure as she could. "I think people struggle for a lot of reasons, but assuming it's because of who they are instead of the challenges they face is the real problem." Mr. Reynolds smirked. Interesting perspective, but let's be real, some people just don't work hard enough. The room went silent. Maya could feel all eyes on her. She wanted to argue, to stand up for herself, but she knew it wouldn't matter. Mr. Reynolds had already decided his opinion of her. What he didn't know, though, was that Maya wasn't alone in this fight. She had someone in her corner, someone who wouldn't let this slide. That night, Maya sat at the dinner table with her father, Captain James Carter, a well-respected police officer in their community. He could tell something was wrong the moment he saw her face. "What happened at school today?" he asked, his deep voice calm but firm. Maya hesitated, but then the words tumbled out. She told him everything, every comment, every smirk, every time Mr. Reynolds made her feel less than. She had kept quiet for too long, but now there was no holding back. Her father listened carefully, his jaw tightening with every word. And when she finished, he simply nodded and said, "We're going to handle this." What happened next? Let's just say, Mr. Reynolds was about to learn a lesson of his own. The next morning, Maya walked into school with a mix of nerves and determination. She wasn't sure what her father had planned, but she knew one thing for sure: he wasn't the kind of man to let something like this slide. Captain Carter was known for being fair but firm, a man who stood by his values, whether he was wearing his uniform or sitting at the dinner table. Maya tried to push the thoughts aside as she took her seat in history class. Mr. Reynolds barely acknowledged her as he started the lesson, but that didn't mean she was off the hook. He always found a way to take little jabs, and today was no different. As he paced in front of the whiteboard, he spoke in his usual authoritative tone. "Hard work and discipline, that's what determines success. Some people make excuses, blame the system, but at the end of the day, effort is what matters." Maya felt her stomach twist. She could tell he wasn't just talking about history. His eyes flickered toward her, just for a second, but it was enough. A few students shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others, the ones who always laughed along, smirked. Maya clenched her jaw. She had spent so much time trying to ignore it, trying to be the bigger person. But the more she stayed silent, the worse it got. And today, she knew something was different, because today her father was listening. At exactly 10:45 a.m., the classroom door swung open. The sound echoed through the room, stopping Mr. Reynolds mid-sentence. Every head turned, and there, standing in the doorway, was Captain James Carter. His presence alone commanded attention. He wasn't in his uniform, but he didn't need to be. There was something about the way he carried himself, calm, strong, unreadable. "Mr. Reynolds," he said, his voice steady but firm. "May I have a word?" The teacher's expression barely faltered, but Maya caught the flicker of something in his eyes, surprise, maybe even discomfort. "Of course," Mr. Reynolds said, forcing a tight smile. He turned to the class. "Continue reading the chapter. I'll be right back." The moment the door closed behind them, the room buzzed with whispers. Students exchanged glances, some curious, others stunned. Maya's heart pounded. She had no idea what her father was saying to Mr. Reynolds, but she knew this was far from over. Minutes passed, stretching into what felt like forever. Maya tapped her fingers against the desk, staring at the door, waiting. Finally, it swung open again. Mr. Reynolds walked back in, his face unreadable. Captain Carter was gone. The teacher cleared his throat. "Let's continue." But something was different. His voice was sharper, his shoulders tense. He didn't look at Maya once. She knew then this was only the beginning. After class, Maya could feel the shift in the air. The usual smugness in Mr. Reynolds' voice was gone, replaced by something else. Tension, uncertainty. He barely looked at her as he dismissed the students, and for the first time in weeks, she didn't feel like a target. But that didn't mean the battle was over. If anything, she knew this was just the start. As she made her way to her locker, her best friend, Aliyah, caught up to her. "Okay, spill. What was that about?" she whispered, eyes wide with curiosity. Maya hesitated. She hadn't told anyone about her father stepping in. She wasn't sure how people would react, especially since she had tried so hard to handle this on her own. But Aliyah wasn't just anyone. She was the one person who had seen everything, who had been there when Maya had to hold back tears after class. When she had stayed up late rereading assignments Mr. Reynolds had torn apart with his red pen. "My dad talked to him," Maya finally admitted. Aliyah's mouth fell open. "Wait, what? Like, talked? Maya nodded. "I don't know what he said, but something's different." Aliyah glanced toward the history classroom. "Well, good. He deserved to be called out. But you know guys like him, they don't like being challenged. Be careful." Maya already knew that. Mr. Reynolds wasn't the type to just let things go. If anything, he would find a way to strike back, and she had a sinking feeling that this wasn't over. Later that evening, as Maya sat at the dinner table, her father studied her carefully. "How was school today?" She shrugged, pushing her food around her plate. "Different." Captain Carter set his fork down. "He didn't bother you?" "Not really," she admitted. "But it's weird. He didn't call on me. Didn't even look at me." Her father nodded as if he expected that. Bullies don't like being confronted, but don't mistake silence for change. If anything, this is when you need to be most aware. Maya swallowed hard. She wanted to believe it was over, that one conversation had been enough. But deep down she knew her father was right. The next few days passed without incident. Mr. Reynolds avoided her, and for the first time in months, Maya felt like she could breathe. But something about it felt too easy, too quiet. Then, on Friday morning, she walked into class and felt the stares before she even sat down. Whispers spread through the room like wildfire, and when she slid into her seat, Aliyah leaned in. "Maya, look at the board." Her heart pounded as she turned her head. There, written in bold red letters across the whiteboard, was a message. "Some people will always need their daddy to fight their battles." Maya's breath caught in her throat. A few students snickered under their breath. Others just looked away, pretending not to see. But Mr. Reynolds stood at his desk, not saying a word. He didn't have to. Maya knew exactly what this was, and this time she wasn't going to back down. Maya's fingers tightened into fists as she stared at the words on the board. The room felt heavy, charged with silent anticipation. No one spoke, but the message was loud and clear. This wasn't just another one of Mr. Reynolds' subtle jabs. This was deliberate, meant to humiliate her in front of everyone. She could feel the eyes on her, waiting to see how she would react. Aliyah shifted uncomfortably beside her, her expression a mix of anger and concern. "Maya," she whispered, "we can go to the principal." Before she could finish, Mr. Reynolds finally turned around, acting as if he had just noticed the message himself. He sighed dramatically, picking up an eraser. "Let's be mature, people. This isn't how we handle disagreements," he said, wiping the words away in slow strokes. "We all have to learn to deal with challenges without running to authority figures, don't we?" A few students laughed under their breath. Maya's stomach twisted. He wasn't even trying to hide it. He wanted her to know this was personal. Her father's words from the other night echoed in her mind. Don't mistake silence for change. He had been right. Mr. Reynolds hadn't stopped. He had just been waiting for the right moment to strike back. Maya inhaled deeply, steadying herself. She refused to give him the reaction he wanted. Instead, she lifted her chin and met his gaze head-on. "You're right, Mr. Reynolds. We should handle challenges the right way." Her voice was calm, controlled. "So, I think I'll do just that." His smirk faltered for a split second, but he recovered quickly. "Glad to hear it," he said smoothly. "Now, let's get back to the lesson." Maya didn't say another word, but in that moment, something inside her shifted. She was done letting him control the narrative. At lunch, she sat with Aliyah, barely touching her food. "I need to do something," she muttered. Aliyah nodded. "Yeah, but what?" "He's careful. He knows how to make it seem like he's not doing anything wrong." Maya thought for a long moment, then pulled out her phone. "Then we make sure people see the truth." That afternoon, she walked into history class early. The room was empty, except for Mr. Reynolds, who was at his desk, flipping through papers. He didn't even glance up when she entered. "Something you need, Maya?" he asked without looking. She took a step closer. "Just wanted to let you know," she said evenly, "I recorded everything you said in class today." That made him pause. Slowly, he lifted his head, his expression unreadable. "Excuse me." Maya kept her voice steady. "I recorded you. And I'll be sharing it. With the principal, with the school board, with my dad." A beat of silence stretched between them. His jaw tightened just slightly, but his eyes gave him away. He wasn't as untouchable as he thought he was. Then, for the first time, Mr. Reynolds looked uneasy. Mr. Reynolds stared at Maya for a long moment, his usual arrogance flickering into something else, something closer to fear. But then, just as quickly as it appeared, he forced a smirk, leaning back in his chair. "You think you're clever, don't you?" he said, his voice controlled, but laced with something darker. "A recording? That's cute. But let me remind you of something. Context matters. Who do you think they'll believe? A student? Or a respected educator?" Maya didn't flinch. "They'll believe the truth." Mr. Reynolds let out a low chuckle. "We'll see about that." He shuffled some papers on his desk, acting unbothered, but Maya noticed the way his fingers tensed around the edges. He wasn't as untouchable as he wanted her to think. She turned and walked out, but the moment she stepped into the hallway, her phone buzzed in her pocket. Pulling it out, she froze. An email from an unknown sender. Subject CT. Be careful who you cross. Her breath caught as she opened it. MESSAGE. You don't want to make enemies in the wrong places. Drop this now. Maya's pulse pounded. She glanced around, but the hallway was filled with students rushing to their next class, completely unaware of the storm brewing inside her. Who sent this? Was it Mr. Reynolds? Someone else? She quickly forwarded the email to her dad without saying a word, knowing he'd understand the weight of it. Then, she slipped her phone back into her pocket and forced herself to keep walking. When she got home that evening, Captain Carter was already waiting for her in the kitchen, phone in hand, his expression unreadable. "You got an interesting message today," he said. Maya swallowed. "Did you trace it?" He nodded. "It was sent from a school computer. Someone wanted to stay anonymous, but they didn't do a very good job." Her stomach tightened. Who was it? Her father sighed, rubbing a hand over his chin. Not Reynolds, but someone close to him. He slid his phone across the table, showing how the traced IP address. The email came from the teacher's lounge. Maya's heart sank. This wasn't just one man trying to make her life miserable. It was bigger than that. There's more, her dad continued. I checked into Reynolds' history. This isn't the first time a student has had issues with him. Complaints have been made before, but they never went anywhere. Maya clenched her fists, because someone's been covering for him. Captain Carter nodded. And we're going to find out who. The weight of the situation settled over Maya like a heavy storm cloud. She had thought this was just about a bad teacher with a personal grudge. But now, it was clear. This was bigger than one classroom. Someone was protecting Mr. Reynolds, and Maya was about to find out why.